Okay, just here with Andrew Kaufman, and he's just letting me know how he got into this whole, I guess, journey of questioning the mainstream narratives that we hear, especially around contagion, essentially. And my video may have just cut out before, so I'll just fill you in, but he's just telling me that a personal tragedy started him off in this direction. So, yeah, can you tell us more about that? Just I mean, whatever you're comfortable with, obviously, and how it within context of what we're talking about.
Right. Well, actually, it was really a convergence of several things. You know, one of them was sort of like the election of the first year that Trump came into office and all of the shocking.
Welcome back to Awakening Health. Andrew Kaufman is a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, and a molecular biologist. So he is primed to be in a very interesting position to dispel myths and debunk some of our beliefs around viruses and bacteria. I met Dr. Kaufman in Acapulco in Mexico at a conference, and he was kind enough to give me an interview, and I will show that interview in this video. But beforehand, I wanted to give a bit of context as to what Dr. Kaufman is about. A little while before the events of the last 3 years, I started looking into evidence that our thoughts around how contagion looks may be quite inaccurate, if not full-on wrong. And when I came across Dr. Kaufman's breakdown of some of the evidence and the research behind contagion, I found that he was very systematic in looking at research around contagion and viruses. His information has had a significant effect on the way I think about contagion in relation to both viruses and bacteria, and I have significant doubts about a science which underpins the whole of my training and, in fact, the whole of the training of the allopathic medical system. So I'm going to play a couple of clips of his first to get some context behind some of his work and what he's saying. And I think, like me, you'll find that the evidence he uses for his hypothesis is actually very credible and quite sound. This first clip describes something called Koch's or Koch's postulates. And if we stuck to these rules or theories, then we could definitively prove contagion. I'll let Andrew explain.
So there are 4 postulates, and these are some common sense rules that were formulated originally in the late 1800s to provide a way to determine if a microorganism or germ causes a disease. So the first postulate is the microorganism must be found in abundance in all organisms suffering from the disease, but should not be found in healthy organisms. Pretty common sense. Number 2, the microorganism must be isolated from a diseased organism or a person and grown in a pure culture. 3, the cultured microorganism should cause disease when introduced into a healthy organism. So once you've isolated it from a sick person and purified it, then you can put it into a healthy person and cause the same disease. And 4th, you must be able to re-isolate that organism from the person that you made sick. And if you can do all these steps, you've proved pretty much conclusively that that microorganism or germ causes the disease.
So we can see that these scientists in their experiments are actually not using Koch's postulates, and they're using something called Rivers criteria. So Andrew proceeds here to go through the differences between Koch's postulates and Rivers criteria.
According to Rivers, there are 6 criteria to establish virus as a cause of disease, and I'm going to tell you what those 6 criteria are. And I'm going to compare and contrast that to Koch's postulates. So you'll see that the color coding tells you which matches up with which, so you can see that there is quite a bit of overlap. So the one that that Rivers did not require was that the microorganism is found in ill but not healthy people. So that seemingly was too difficult to prove for Rivers, but I feel that this is a major shortcoming, because if you can't find a virus in a sick person with the disease that you're looking at, then how can you really say that it causes that virus? However, I'm going to give it a pass because they're using the Rivers criteria, so I will apply the Rivers criteria. And you can see that it definitely requires isolation of the virus from a diseased host. just like Koch's criteria. And also, there's a slight difference in how it's cultivated because viruses are not living organisms. They can't reproduce on their own. So you cannot grow them in a pure culture. So for example, if you isolated, let's say, Staphylococcus from a sick person, you could grow that Staphylococcus in a pure culture that will only be Staphylococcus cells. But with a virus, since they can't reproduce and they're not alive, you can't grow them in a pure culture of just virus particles. So you need to have host cells. So that would be cells basically from the person who is ill or the source of the virus in the first place. Now there's the third criteria of Rivers, which is not in Koch's postulates, which is proof of filterability. And this is important because the virus particles are very, very tiny in the nanometer scale, which is a billionth of a meter. And so if they have a filter with very, very small pores, much smaller than the masks people are wearing, only the particles that are considered to be a virus can pass through, and all of the other cells like the host cells or any bacteria or fungal cells that are in the mix will get filtered out. So this is a way to purify the viral particle. Number 4, you must be able to take that isolated particle or virus and put it into a healthy host and cause the same disease. So that's the same as the third criteria of Koch's postulates. And this is the criterion that is the most important for proving that this agent causes a disease. You can't say that it causes a disease without this step, because before that, even if you find it in people with the disease, it's just an association or a correlation, and that does not prove causation. And I'll give you an example. Let's say that you show up at a fire and you see there are firefighters there. Now, you can't assume that the firefighters caused the fire just because they're there. They're just associated with the fire. And actually, they're doing the opposite. They're putting out the fire. So you can be really confused without this step. Then the fifth criterion is re-isolation of the virus. So that's from the person that you produced the disease in. You can once again isolate that particle or agent from that person. And then finally, the detection of a specific immune response to the virus. And this is much more difficult to prove because of the specificity issue, but I'm not going to really cover that very much during this talk because it is in my opinion, the least important of the criteria.
Now, you noted here that isolation was an important part of proving contagion. Okay, just here with Andrew Kaufman, and he's just letting me know how he got into this whole, I guess, journey of questioning the mainstream narratives that we hear, especially around contagion, essentially. And my video may have just cut out before, so I'll just fill you in, but he's just telling me that a personal tragedy started him off in this direction. So yeah, can you tell us more about that? Just very, I mean, whatever you're comfortable with, obviously, and how it within context of what we're talking about.
Right. No, well, actually, it was really a convergence of several things. You know, one of them was sort of like the election of the first year that Trump came into office and all of the shocking things that happened in that election with Clinton and Bernie.
I highly recommend that you look closely at the rest of his work. If you can find flaws in his methodology, feel free to get back to me and let me know. I'm sure he's quite open to taking on any sort of robust discussion which may call into question his hypothesis around whether viruses, as we are told, actually exist, and in fact whether what we are told about contagion is a complete myth. If you like this video, please subscribe, give it a like, give me feedback in the comments, and I'll bring you some more interviews from Mexico very soon.